This is a debrief of the September-December exam 2019 ACCA SBR Strategic Business Reporting. I'm not aiming to show you to get 100%. I'm trying to make sure that you know what to do to pass. So a lot of it is thinking about how we obtain the easy marks in this exam. Before you watch the debrief, download the exam from the ACCA website. Also, before you watch each part of the debrief, I'd recommend you do read the question and then do a plan as to what you think I'm going to say, then watch the debrief. Question 1 is called Luploid or something like that. It's in 3 parts, so we're going to have a look at part A. Part A itself is in 2 parts. Excuse me, and even the first part, in a sense, is in 2 parts because they want to know about the fair value of the factory site. And also, why you shouldn't be using replacement cost, which is probably a big hint as to why you should be using the other method that they mentioned. So I guess we can all get 1 mark. IFRS 13 is one of the most important standards in the syllabus because it tells businesses, remember, how to measure fair value. And the key message about IFRS 13 is it's an exit price. So that means the price at which you would sell the asset. So essentially, start by putting down a definition of fair value. I won't write it out now, but again, or not in full, but it's all about the price that would be received. Again, active market, orderly market, again, between active participants, etc. And in addition, it says that where you have a choice of valuations, IFRS 13 says that you should use the highest and best use. So in terms of this property, the current value would give a different value to what would happen if they actually converted it into residential. So the highest and best use is residential. That would cost $1 million in terms of demolition costs. So 24 million coming in, 1 million going out for demolition again, and that would give you 23 million. So very important, you've looked back at IFRS 13 and you could write that definition out fully on fair values. They ask about replacement cost. Replacement cost is principally used for specialized assets. So if you had something which was unique in a particular area, like a steel foundry, and there isn't a steel foundry next to you, then in that case, perhaps a better measure of fair value would be to look at replacement cost, but at the same time depreciating it. So that first part of the question, the very first part there, straightforward again, marks going for basic knowledge of IFRS 13. If you use the wrong fair value, and therefore you put that into the Goodwill calculation, you'll still get full marks on the Goodwill. Requirement 2, the 2 methods of translating Goodwill, calculating Goodwill. So very straightforward question. That can't go wrong, can it? Fair value versus proportionate Goodwill. The cost of the investment is 90. NCI, if you use fair value, it's measured at fair value, which will be given in the question. And the question said 22. If you use proportionate goodwill, then it's a percentage of the net assets. This is an 80% subsidiary, so it's 20% of the net assets of that subsidiary. The net assets in the question were 65, but we've just posted a fair value adjustment of 23. But method mark if you've posted a different one. So 88 for fair value, 88 for proportionate. The minority interest, or NCI, would then be 20% of 88, 20% of 88, 17.6. So in terms of a final number for goodwill, we're looking at 24, 19.6. No need for any explanation for the goodwill, it just says calculate. And again, proportionate goodwill will always give you a smaller figure. This is the goodwill only on my share of the business. Full goodwill also includes the goodwill on the share of the business that belongs to the non-controlling interest. Requirement B. And requirement B is about impairment. It's not a place where I would aim to get full marks because the calculations can be very messy. However, it says discuss, so some very easy marks for explanations. So in terms of your explanation, these are the words I'd like to see in your answer. Remember, impairment is often, as here, triggered by an impairment indicator. So if you see an impairment indicator in this scenario, then mention it. In terms of explaining the theory, remember that the assets have to be valued at the lower of the carrying amount and recoverable amount. And also that the assets will be grouped together in a little bundle, and that is a cash generating unit. A subsidiary would normally be seen as a cash generating unit because it generates independent streams of income. Also, in terms of explanation, that when you actually calculate the loss in terms of the allocation of the loss, first of all, you write down assets that have been obviously impaired. So if the roof falls off the factory, that's obviously impaired, for example. Secondly, you allocate loss to goodwill. And thirdly, the rest of the loss is allocated to any remaining fixed or non-current assets. So thirdly, to other non-current assets. And that's always messy because you might have some intangibles and you might have some PPE. But that's easy things to say. Another thing to say that's quite easy is depending on the type of the goodwill that is happening, when you think about the impairment, if you're using full or fair value goodwill, in that case, the impairment is shared between the group and the NCI. And then, if you're using proportionate goodwill, then all of the impairment is allocated to the group. So 100% again goes to the group. So in terms of calculations, in terms of words, we've probably got half the marks. In terms of the numbers, I'm not proposing to go through them in a huge amount of detail, just to start off the calculation. You probably find it frustrating that when you read the model answer, they've done something very strange known as grossing up the goodwill if it's proportionate, which is correct, and you're supposed to do it. And when you look at the answer, actually it doesn't seem to affect the final answer either. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Again, not worth shedding blood over. But in theory, when we set up our pro forma again for the impairment, I'm just going to start this thing off. So we've got two types. So initially, when I'm trying to sort out this impairment, two types of goodwill, either measured at fair value or using proportionate. So we start with the value of the goodwill. If you're using fair value, I think we worked out that the goodwill in the first part of the question was 24. The net assets, again, were given, I think, somewhere in the question. It says that the net assets, again, at the date of the impairment were 106. That's 130. We're also told the recoverable amount. The recoverable amount was 100. So the impairment, again, is 30. If you're using proportionate goodwill, there's a lecture on this, by the way, in our materials, then you're actually supposed to gross it up. Why? Because they say you need to match like with like. If you've got 100% of net assets, 100% of recoverable amount, you ought to show 100% of goodwill. Well, sometimes life is very annoying. So in the first part of the question, we had goodwill of 19.6. You're supposed to gross it up. I think this was an 80% subsidiary. So if you're looking at the answer, again, that comes out as 24.5. The other figures are the same. So that's 130.5. The recoverable amount is the same. That's 100. So the loss comes out as 30.5. Using the method on the left, I won't write the figures up, but that goodwill impairment of 30 would first be allocated against the building that was damaged in the storm. That's 4. Then all the goodwill would get written off. And then finally, they'd prorate the rest of the loss. On the right-hand side, it's the same, but essentially, you gross the goodwill up at the start, and then later, you kind of prorate the loss at the end. You'll see it in the answer, and in fact, in this one, it doesn't seem to make any difference to the answer, but just try and get the basic marks. So don't stress too much about all the calculations in the answer, but make sure you pick up these very easy marks again from the explanation. Requirement C is in 2 parts, and very important that we go for easy marks. C1 is also in 2 parts. The first thing is talking about how we would measure the consideration, which is the share consideration for the subsidiary. Remember, in a takeover, very important that you revise fair value. So in a takeover, again, you want the fair value of the shares that are being issued on the date of the takeover. So ultimately, they will debit the investment, credit share capital and share premium with the relevant value. That calculation is easy to process. There are 10 million shares of the subsidiary. I am buying 60%. I'm giving 2 for 5. And the fair value, again, is $30, which I think gives you 72 million. 2 marks. Very straightforward. Then a very strange question saying, what about the cost of the share scheme? is this part of the consideration? So again, in the answer, he's done some calculations, which I don't think I've seen those in a very long time, perhaps 30 years, and perhaps it will be 30 years till I see it again. So I'm not going to lose sleep about that. But I can still get something for the principal. I understand that we are obliged to repay the scheme, so that must have some kind of cost. So again, I think I can probably say, without getting into any detail, that actually one of the things that I'm doing, part of the consideration, is the obligation to replace the scheme. And presumably, like everything else, it must be measured at fair value. So if you're a prize winner, you can work through the numbers, obviously, in the question. If you're a regular person, I wouldn't be losing sleep there. The second part then asked us again about the share-based pay. It asked us again to have a discussion and to do a calculation. The key thing I want to focus on is the discussion. And when you explain share-based pay, you're looking for 4 sentences. Number 1, you need to explain the reason why the scheme is equity or cash settled. In this case, it's equity settled because it's settled in shares. Secondly, the fact that the expense must be spread over the vesting period. In that case, that's 2 years. Thirdly, the fair value of the shares at the grant date. Now, if I'd been answering that, I would have just ploughed in by saying the fair value of those shares, again, is $20, I think, because it says that's the fair value of the option. Again, the answer will say something slightly different. And finally, the number of options or shares or whatever expected to vest. And of course, that takes account of the people who might leave the scheme and so on. So the number of instruments expected to vest. So how many of these shares will eventually be issued? In addition, the other thing that you must remember is that share-based pay, you do take account of vesting conditions like performance conditions, profit targets, attending work, personal performance targets, but for the calculation, you ignore any share price condition. So in the calculation, again, you ignore, again, any share price condition. That's because, again, somehow the share price volatility is built into the fair value of the option at the grant date by someone very clever who's calculated the fair value of the option or share. Maybe that's you if you've done advanced financial management. That's known as a market condition. So in our calculation, we do not take account of market conditions. So if you were halfway through the scheme, hypothetically, you'd write 1/2, then you'd estimate the number of shares to be issued, write down the fair value, again, to try and get the expense in the profit and loss. Very easy marks, of course, again, just remembering what the basic double entry is. Debit P&L, credit equity. You don't have to write debit and credit. So if your journals are a bit ropey, you can just say profit will go down and equity will go up.